Welcome to Thursday Night Talk. This is our local talk show where we'll discuss the week in Humboldt, the local issues, and the local personalities. I'm your local host, Talvi Fried, and I'll be here with you for the next hour with several guests. Just want to start off by saying I'm in a good mood because I have a new dress and it has pockets. Joining us tonight are Eric Kirk, host of Redwood Wonk, which you can hear right here by staying tuned to KZZH right after this program. Dr. Aaron Donaldson, lecturer, Department of Communication Studies at California Polytechnic State University, and Bob Doran, a columnist, photographer, host of The Hum, and all-around friend of everyone. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I like doing that all at once just to see what would happen. Now we know. Everybody gets confused. I love it. Our topic tonight, we'll jump right into it. Perhaps we'll start with Aaron, because you seem to have the most insider knowledge considering you work for Cal Poly. We were trying to discuss the name before the show started. It's Cal Poly Humboldt, CPH.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it Cal Poly Humboldt? So it's Cal Polytechnic Humboldt University, or?
I'm still trying to get all that straight too, Talvi. You're not alone. Everyone on campus, everyone around campus is playing this little game.
Though now it's supposed to be called just H. That's what the cool kids are calling it.
Yeah, that was Bob's observation, actually. Bob, you want to clarify that?
Well, that's what they call, that's the name they put on when they rebranded recently. They had a big, they took over the plaza for a while and they said H. But, the gates, which is right by my house, they say Cal Poly Humboldt. That's what it says here.
Yeah, as far as I know, it is California Polytechnic State University, Humboldt, or Cal Poly Humboldt, if you prefer. CPH is the abbreviation. I had said that, HSU to me sounds very collegiate. CPH sounds a little, commercialized, maybe corporatized. I don't know. There's going to be a lot of getting used to it, but I will say it is, I think, very cool to be part of a polytechnic. I think the shift is going to create a lot of changes, and obviously there's going to be a lot of different angles that we could look at, but I do think there's a lot of value to polytechnic education. So I think that, there's some good to be said about that.
Did they use the same board of individuals to name the school as they did the airport? Because that's frustrating. Though we decided on a general topic. Just let's talk about Cal Poly Humboldt. They have expansion plans right now. It's affecting the community. They want to not just expansion plans with land use and housing. They want to, or are expecting, 100% increase in student population. Right now, they are 40% under what they expected. So there's going to be a lot to discuss. Usually we do have 2 to 3 topics. This is just all Cal Poly all the time because it does affect the entire community. Everything from apartment pricing to the cost of food to gas prices somehow are affected by this Polytechnic University, Humboldt. Though let's start with the new programs.
Okay. It's a lot. And, in the interest of just trying to make it quick at the top here, the ones that they're looking at for fall of 2023, there's at least 12 programs that they want to implement by then, including mechanical engineering, cannabis studies, applied fire science and management, marine biology. There is a full list of what they call the academic programs build out on the campus website that you can go to. And it lists master's programs, bachelor's programs, certificates that they're going to be unveiling between 2023, 26, and 29. And there's a lot of very fascinating new programs coming our way.
I have to insert here that if they had cannabis studies when I went to college, that would have been my major. And that's how I made my living, buying and selling cannabis. It was illegal, black market, like Southern Humboldt was, but that's the truth. I'm curious about that. This is another topic for another day, but how were they going to deal with cannabis? Are they going to bring in the the real people who developed the industry, who still are ignored now? That they're most of them are going black market. But that's another topic for another day. But they're interesting to me.
It's a fascinating program, and we could go into it if we'd like to. I think you're right; it is for another time. But it's worth noting that as we move towards decriminalization and commercialization of cannabis, there's just a whole host of an industry now that needs really serious consideration, that's been neglected and stymied historically. And I think everything like what you're talking about, from like the land management and stuff like that, to just what do we put in this? How do we regulate this content? All sorts of issues come up.
Does anybody know if there's any other program in any other university that has a cannabis specific program? I mean, this seems to be the location, the Emerald Triangle, right? But I'm just
can't name any other programs, but I do know that it's something that exists. I mean, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I tell my students when I was the debate coach at the University of Oregon, their back files had evidence that said that Marlboro trademarked Marlboro Greens in the 70s.
Right. Yes.
They're just sitting on it.
Maui Wowie and all
Right.
of those have been trademarked ahead of time, no matter how generic they are. I'm sure Humboldt Red too.
Yeah. Well, I think we should move on to the expansion of the campus. I was interested, the recent copy of the Humboldt magazine, which is it's sent out to the alumni. I'm an alumnus, so it has an article about building for the future, and it shows all the stuff that's going to go on. And I don't write for a paper anymore, but I write on Facebook and Instagram. And I wrote a little article about what this means. Like, there's a bunch of stuff going on campus. They're building dormitories in the middle of campus. They're building buildings that have partial student housing in the building itself. What occurred to me is, right now, I live half a block from the Trinity Hospital, now soon to become the Children's Center. And it's there. Every morning I wake up, before I wake up, at 7:30 in the morning, there's nails being pounded. There's the backup chime of a truck that goes endlessly. I don't know why that goes, but it's an impact on our life, because they're building a big building there.
Mm-hmm.
That the whole campus is going to be that way for years, and it's like, as a new student, I think I'd be a little bit. Well, I don't know. I watched what happened with the library, which was over budget, and way over the time they said it would be done, and it's like, I don't even know if it's done now. Is it done?
It is. It was right outside my office. I listened to jackhammering for 3 years. They gave us sound canceling headphones, which I thought was nice, but terribly insufficient given the context. I think you're right, Bob, that there will be a huge footprint, a huge impact construction wise on campus, around campus. John Ross Ferreira has a really great Lost Coast Outpost article from the 22nd of March, just really detailing all of the different things going on all across campus, multiple buildings being bulldozed, all sorts of open fields being turned into 5-story engineering buildings. I am for this kind of development. I think it is necessary. I think the population increase is going to be the real big one that we should talk about, but all of it happening at once, that's going to be a major environmental shift for us on our campus.
It's not going to be. Oh, Eric, I was actually going to kind of throw it to you. You had mentioned the sort of displacement of other housing programs that's been going on because of HSU, such as the senior housing that was planned. I forget where exactly. It was like a 16-acre site. It's in the North Coast Journal if anybody wants to read that article about
Foster Avenue.
Foster Avenue. And I know you had mentioned it.
Life Plan Humboldt, which is headed by Dr. Ann Lindsay, who's put a lot of work into it. They had their rug pulled out from them because their plan was just, okay, HSU, Humboldt has more money than we have. So, but they've landed on their feet. They've got a new site in McKinleyville. So but I think it's sort of typical of the way it's been going to be working. Like the Craftsman's Mall is another example. There was a long-term developer was planning on turning the property into basically student housing, and he brought it before the city council of Arcata. Again and again, he kept reducing it and downsizing it to fit their parameters, and then finally he gave up. And then it turned out that HSU was in communication with him all the time, and that they bought the property. And now that means Arcata, the city of Arcata, has no say what happens there. They can do whatever they want, and that may be the case again. It's like we're talking about a gateway plan. Is a big hot topic of the moment. The city council election is coming up. That's going to be the issue of the day. Well, it could be really easily that Humboldt State is going to buy some property in the gateway. They play their cards really close to their vest, to use an old phrase. They don't tell you what's going on. That's the
Thank
reality.
you, Rob. It's true. Eric, I know this was something you felt passionate about because it affects your life directly.
Well, it affects everybody's life, and I like Aaron. I support most of what's going on. I mean, the improvements, the Marine Lab alone is going to be a fascinating thing. But I am concerned about the fact that a lot of times communities, when they were trying to get these universities, whether UC or state colleges, to come in, they made some kind of what I would call Faustian deals. I mean, they are not subject to local ordinances, or zoning or anything, and they basically sign the agreement that they understand that when the universities come in, everybody wants them because they're good for the local economy, give prestige to the area, and all of that. But my experience was with Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, which is also a lot bigger than it was when I attended it in the early '80s, and the original agreement that the university made was, I don't know if you know, but there's the way it's structured is the campus, the university is divided into a bunch of colleges, now 12. At that time, when I was there, 10, and originally 8. And Cal College was supposed to be the only buildings that were visible from town on the campus. But years later, university decided to break that promise and build like a 6-story ugly parking garage on the West Field. And, the town is now stuck with that. But fortunately, we've got statewide environmental laws that do require that they have to do EIRs and the rest with regard to traffic, which is actually a big concern, and impacts on other things like housing. But it's very limited. The locals, the communities have very little standing to challenge the universities in this. And they can just charge you, outbid, undersell, outbid everybody, and just fill fill up the place with their housing at the expense of senior housing. Now, granted, seniors have another place to go, but it's not the same as being in a town like Arcata, to be in McKinleyville. It's just not. So anyway, I have very mixed feelings about it, and just the arrogance by which universities sometimes feel like they don't have to be accountable to the local communities is disturbing, and we're witnessing a little bit of it. We'll see how bad it gets.
For me, it just is a little bit of personal history, but I lived in McKinleyville for a long time, and I moved to Arcata in 2003, I think it was. In 2004, I was visited by Tia Gass, who was the mayor of she just recently passed. Tia was an actress type. She told me, you should read the general plan for Humboldt State. You absolutely should. And I did. And I found that the general plan at the time showed my house and my entire neighborhood gone, replaced with a soccer field and a bunch of housing, which we said, well, we don't want that. This is when when Roland Richmond was president. We had to form a neighborhood organization, the Bayview Neighborhood Association, and we basically said, no, you can't take our community. They were gonna take away all the land in between 14th Street and 11th Street up to Union, which is like a huge swath of land, and they just were gonna replace with student housing. Well, they ultimately put the same project on the other side of 14th Street. Now the soccer fields where the gates are. But, that's what happens if you don't pay attention. Yeah. I know.
It feels a lot like there's a segregation happening, where Eureka is becoming the low-income housing community, senior housing community. Fortuna is becoming the senior housing community. McKinleyville and Arcata are becoming the student housing communities. How that will affect things, I can have an idea, but I'm not exactly sure. Aaron, do you feel like this is being addressed within HSU? I know it always comes down to power dynamics, doesn't it? Who has the power here gets a say in what happens to the community. Though you work for the people in power, and you probably have more of an insider perspective than the layman. And I would consider myself a layman in this term. I'm neither a student nor do I work for HSU.
One of the sources of information that I do have on all of this is through the California Faculty Association. I'm the lecturer representative for the Humboldt chapter. CFA is the 29,000 member union that represents all of the CSU employees that are like counselors and librarians and teachers. And real basic things keep coming up a lot. I really want to echo back what Eric said about the kind of Faustian deals that we pose. Arcata is a small town. It's like 18,000 people. And where I come from in Montana, you do not have a bus system when there's 18,000 people. You do not have a library like we have here when there's 18,000 people. You just don't have the infrastructure that exists here when there's 18,000 people. But when you have a place like Cal Poly Humboldt, it's going to bring a lot here. It's one of the biggest employers. It creates a whole lot of infrastructure. But at the same time, they're going to be able to really push people around. The CFA was talking about how if they hit their mark, they could increase the population of this city by like 33% in like 3 years. And in a rural community, that's a huge shock to like your hospital systems, to like your fire systems. They're looking at building multi-story buildings, and Arcata, so far as I know, does not have a ladder truck. And they want to say that sprinklers are sufficient. And I just don't want to wait for sprinklers to put a fire out. I want more resources available. And so there are a lot of concerns within the CFA in terms of how quickly this development is happening and all of the additional strains that it's putting on already overstressed resources that we have on campus. The population boom is going to be extravagant. And I really don't know that there's an easy way to work that into a place as rural here. And I really do appreciate what you said, Talvi, about the segregation of the housing. One of the huge concerns that I have about the new dormitory going in behind my house, which will be 1,059 units and a parking garage, that's a lot of new neighbors. One of the concerns that I have is I want a building there that can house a lot of people, but dorms are really expensive and priced at a very particular pricing point called tuition. And that is just not accessible to the people of Arcata that need housing. There are far too many people also in Arcata, definitely in Eureka and McKinleyville, that need housing.
I would hope that there is a plan to maybe encourage student housing in Eureka, but it sounds like we're going to our first break. So
we are going to our first break. That is a good time to kind of take a break. You're listening to KZZH, and we will be back. This is Thursday Night Talks.
Commercial break?
Hello, and welcome back to Thursday Night Talk. I'm your local host, Talvi Fried. I'm here with Bob Doran, Dr. Aaron Donaldson, and we've got Eric Kirk. I feel like these names are a tongue twister for me today. We are discussing Cal Poly Humboldt, almost at HSU. It is going to take years for this community to break the habit that we are talking about Cal Poly Humboldt. Right now we are discussing, we delved into housing, which is everyone's favorite topic. Right. Housing, property rights, who owns what, where are we gonna put people who need a place to live? And of course, the fun part of if we get another 3,000 extra or 6,000 extra students who then take up housing, who consider it part of their tuition and their loans and their parents are paying, what's that going to do for all of us who have to work and pay rent for ourselves and aren't going to get loans because we come from a generation where they weren't forgiven, which is great that they are forgiven. I'm not mad that people have help despite me not getting it, but all the same.
Needs to be more help, Talvi.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. There needs to be more help for everybody, including all of us. Eric had started.
Well, I wanted to suggest, and I don't know what the plans are, but the university should be looking towards Eureka for student housing. We're going to have this bike trail finished within the next couple of years. A lot of students like to do that, but we should also, the county should be encouraging this, should be discussing it, and maybe having more buses, whatever, because not all gentrification is bad. Gentrification that is carefully planned can actually benefit a community, can even benefit marginalized communities. If there's certain areas of Eureka that could probably really benefit from an influx of students. The businesses can use it, and the rest, and it would take a little bit of pressure off of Arcata and McKinleyville, but. It's the biggest city in the county, obviously. It accounts for about a third of the population and probably about a third of the housing as well. There are a lot of vacant houses. You would think, and maybe the university and the county are working on this together, but you'd think that there would be a way to promote it, and promote it is it's certainly no farther away than McKinleyville to the campus, and just promote ways to make it easier for students to be able to do that. Maybe it spreads it around a little. That's just my thought. But Eureka, is a place that could use a little bit of development, social development. I mean, we've got problems here, and I don't know. It just seems like that if that's not being exploited, I think that's a big mistake on part of both the county and the university.
I have to say, Eurekans are very proud to be Eurekans somehow, despite knowing all the problems. I actually almost went on the defense there of how dare you talk about, we are the cultural epicenter of Humboldt County. We are the municipal epicenter, but it's true. We are also the health services center. We've got all of that here. And yes, we can definitely use more housing, lots more housing, rehabilitation centers, rehabilitative housing, senior housing. We need that not just in Eureka, though. Arcata needs it. And
Sure.
again, it goes back to the segregation aspect of, is Arcata just going to become student housing and faculty housing? I guess, I don't know if Cal Poly has a place called University Hills. I would consider a certain portion of it. My dad was a college professor, and he lived in a University Hills outside of Irvine, and it was a different world. And I grew up, the split parent housing, but going from one area to the university housing, it is a different world. It is completely separated from the rest of the community. If you live in housing, university housing, you live with other students and teachers, and I feel like that's not the full college experience.
No.
Oftentimes people leave to be safe. They go to a school to be safe, which then that goes into, just because HSU changed its name to CPH, all those horror stories that you hear that happened in the dormitories don't go away. It's still a mark on their record. And what would happen in housing? Are they going to hire more security for these housing units? Is there going to be infrastructure to make it brightly lit? Are there going to be doormen now? If the students can afford it, get the doormen for sure, though that's...
We
There's a
also
lot
have
of questions here.
students of color being killed. I mean, one of them and facing issues off of campus that needs to be addressed. And one of the things the university didn't do was inform the local community, a lot of the businesses, that they were actually marketing the university to a lot of a more diverse crowd. And some of the stores didn't expect it. Some students had a hard time finding makeup that worked for them. And it's not like the stores were doing it deliberately. They would love to make the money, but there was no coordination, no just communication and planning of it, and saying, this is what's going to happen, and maybe having sort of get-togethers that involve local business leaders and students, so that the students can get to know what's out there and inform the businesses as to their needs and what they want. But that just didn't happen. They just brought them here and threw them into a situation, and where nobody was prepared for it, and certainly not the police force of Arcata.
That was an
lot of-
issue
lot
I
of
wanted
that
to
was-
pick up real quick, if I could. Sorry, Bob. Talvi, you mentioned like the campus security, and that's one of the ones that the CFA has actually also been like talking about and worried about. We work with Students for Quality Education, which is a student branch that works with the union to pursue a lot of these issues. And the depolicing of campus is one of their top priorities, as far as a lot of our students are concerned. Campus police are an additional threat on this campus. They're a huge draw of financial resources. You can be a police officer on campus and make more than many lecturers there, which is to say nothing against police officers, except that it takes 12 years of education to get a PhD to be a lecturer. And that's not what you go through at the police academy. It's a huge financial drain. We can prove that. It's a threat to a lot of students. There are other ways to provide security, but that's not the route that the university is taking. And just to add a little bit of context, depending on the professors that you're talking about, some of them may well live in nice houses up there on the hill. But for a lot of us, especially those of us that are contingent, it is just as difficult as it is for a lot of students. When I moved here, I was leaving a tenure track job. I had a PhD. I'd coached national debate champions, and I was going to live in a campground. I was 24 hours away from living in a campground. It was literally 24 hours when someone said that they didn't want a house that we had been told we couldn't get. And then they called us back and said, if you want it, you can have it. And if that hadn't come through, I would be teaching a class and then going to a campground. The housing crisis is severe, and it impacts absolutely everyone on campus in really like meaningful ways. People like university professors are living at Cal Poly Humboldt under the radar. This is something we're finding happening from time to time.
I can absolutely believe that. This might be a good time to say that we will take calls. We will absolutely be taking phone calls at this point. The number to call will be 669-900-6833. Again, if you have an opinion, you want to share it, write this down. 669-900-6833. You need a meeting ID to join. That meeting ID number is 511-886-8501. Again, 511-886-8501. And the phone number 669-900-6833. So you mentioned we delved into wages, which Newsom is, I don't know if he is, I'm not sure. I skimmed it. I skimmed these articles. You can find Los Coast Outpost has one. You can also find one in the Los Angeles Times. And I believe the San Francisco Chronicle was where I also read a little bit about this, because it's affecting all of California. They're trying to increase the wages of those working in non-faculty positions at Cal State universities, which would include polytechnic universities. And that would mean janitors, student employees, everything else, parking meters, as well as perhaps campus police, which I do want to delve into. What else would you have if not a private security company? There would just be nothing.
Oh no, there's especially if you get into the anti-policing and the abolishing policing research, there are whole numbers of community resources that respond to circumstances of violence. We could definitely dwell here if you wanted, but I would really just reiterate that it does not take shows of force or threats of force to respond to most, like 90% of issues that we see cropping up. And there are better placed people on campus that could answer this question, but it's definitely not nothing. There are evidence-based solutions, and in fact, most of the evidence that we have says that the classic notion of policing that we see, particularly those that rely on incarceration, are counterproductive in a lot of ways.
Okay, so there are plans for something else.
Absolutely.
You were talking about Governor Newsom. He weighed in on this subject of how many people could get community support in Berkeley. In Berkeley, the Berkeley Neighborhood Association, they've brought up as an environmental impact of increased housing for students. If you expand the enrollment by as much as they're planning here, what is the impact on that? And they won one case. Then Governor Newsom said, "Oh, sorry, we're throwing that out," and he said, "You can't stop it. It's an economy thing." And here's a simple fact: Humboldt State, when I went to school, was I think 8,000 students, that was probably tight. Now I don't know how it is now. It's only 5,000. It went way down, and it was threatened that the university just might go away. So this plan to switch to the Cal Poly was in part to increase the enrollment by a great deal. What is the impact of that on the community? Right now we're seeing the Gateway Plan is going to be put forward to increase housing in Arcata to make it a walkable community, and the build housing for students to a great part. So, if the governor says you can't put a block on that, who's going to stop them? I don't know.
We've got a lot of other things happening too. I mean, we've got the fish farm, the wind farm, the internet cables coming across the Atlantic, which could open up a lot of possibilities for drawing at least small level high tech industries. I mean, we are going to need to address it, to assimilate. Probably at least there's going to be a little bit of a boom if everything works out the way everybody says it is. And what are we going to do? Well, there's going to be a pressure, of course, to build more housing, and there'll be a pressure to not have it regulated too much. The general plan will probably come up again and say, well, we need housing more than we need to have places that look pretty. Without, the fact is that looking pretty is kind of our selling point here. Being a small town is kind of our selling point. If we lose that, we lose that selling point, because otherwise we're kind of isolated out in the middle of nowhere. Why move here, right? So we need. I'll be very curious to see how the Humboldt County general plan, which we haven't seen arguments about that in quite a few years, it incorporates all of these things, because there could be some major changes here over the next 5-10 years.
I think changes are absolutely expected, and with all of these new jobs that are coming, not just from Cal Poly, but also the tech industry with our fiber optic cables and the infrastructure that needs to be built. You need people who can do it, preferably people who know what they're doing. That then goes back to the wages, which, Aaron, I know you know a little bit more, though the Newsom thing just affects those who work at Cal Poly, but not faculty.
There's been quite the showdown going on when it comes to wages. The CSU and the CFA went to the bargaining table just last year. We were fighting for a 4% raise. They offered us a 2% raise. We eventually resolved on something that has still not been completely followed through. They're really nickel and diming their lecturers, their tenure track folks, their counselors, especially. We had exactly like one tenure track counselor, and now we have none. And they are outsourcing those jobs to a startup in Texas called Timely MD, which is like gig economy healthcare work, is essentially what they're doing with all of that work that used to be tenured track jobs here. And at the very same time, this is the recent CSU budget. You're seeing presidents of all 23 of the CSUs getting raises, many of them getting double-digit raises. Thomas Jackson, the president at Cal Poly, makes $395,000. He gets a $55,000 housing stipend. He gets a $1,000 car stipend, and he got a $40,000 raise this year. He got an additional $40,000 raise on top of that, while they're laying off counselors, lecturers, instructors. The CSU, the big concern that I have is that the logic of tuition dollars is not going to fuel the betterment of the community here. It's going to be packing people in to funnel a bunch of tuition profits up to administrators. And it's not like those dollars don't always make their way back into this community.
That is one of the kind of questions I had, is how much money is going to go back into the community? You build all these things for people who don't live here, who are just going to stay here for a little while. And there is a goal to add a retention factor to keep people wanting to live here. But it creates this horrific cycle. It sounds like this horrific cycle of everything's going to go crazy up in price. They're going to get a great education, but maybe not. If all of the teachers and tenure track professors and those who have tenure are getting such a low wage, wages attract people who are new, and everybody needs a break, though people will leave. The good ones will leave because they will find jobs with better opportunities, and then you end up with a bad reputation. And then it's not worth it. You end up, it'll go like this, and then crash. And who gets left with all the damage? Those of us who live here.
The CSU's logic with the raises for all the presidents is if we don't pay these people top dollars, we're going to lose them. But they don't use that logic for their counselors or their librarians or their coaches or their tenure track professors. That logic just goes out the window. I would also just really emphasize that when it comes to the student education, I love seeing all these new buildings going up, but the Tolonaker House building, where the communication department has been housed since at least the 90s, continues to be non-ADA accessible. There is no elevator. There is no ramp. If you want to access half of the faculty offices there, you have to make special accommodations for them to come down to you, because you cannot get upstairs in that building. There is no plan to demolish or renovate that building. Instead, they're going to build a massive engineering center and all of these other buildings. They say they want to preserve the humanities, but debates getting cut because 13 students isn't enough, and we're paying $40,000 additional dollars to the president every year.
Yikes. We're going to be right back after a quick break, and then we'll hear from Bob and Eric as well. I feel like that was a very passionate about wages. You're listening to KZZH. This is Thursday Night Talk. Welcome back to Thursday Night Talk. I'm Talvi Fried, your host for the evening. You're listening to KZZH 96.7 FM. You can always listen live as well. I believe the YouTube stream is up there, kzh.accesshumboldt.net, in case you want to see our shining happy faces talking about Cal Poly Humboldt today. I've got Aaron Donaldson, Eric Kirk, and Bob Doran. I'm sure you've heard all their names before. Now you get to hear them speak tonight for at least another 20 minutes. We just got done discussing very passionately, felt like maybe me and Aaron dominated that a little bit. I get really passionate about wages. Cal Poly Humboldt has a lot going on. Bob, I know you seemed like you were about to say something before the break. So what's happening in your mind here?
Well, what I was thinking was something that Aaron said about the art. This is what worries me about Cal Poly is it's STEM, SGAM, SCEM. What I think
science, technology, engineering, math.
Yeah, I think it needs to be STEAM.
For arts.
You have to maintain the arts. Are a really important thing. I mean, that's what I came from. That's what I studied in Humboldt State, and that's what kept me here. And that's what I makes me passionate about staying in Humboldt. Is the arts are a very important part of our day-to-day life, and that used to be a big thing in the college, but it seems to be by adding a bunch more. The engineering and all those things are important, but not with the leaving out the arts. Like, for example, in this laying out of the new buildings that are going to be coming in, it doesn't show what's where they're going to take out the pottery lab. That part of the plan is not showing. They don't tell us everything that they're up to. So they're going to wipe that out. They're going to replace it with a parking structure. I don't know what else. That's the other thing that kind of bothers me is it seems like we don't really know what's going on, that they're not telling us everything that they're up to. And the Crescent Mall is a classic example. They were making plans without telling us. That's all. And I want to be more open.
I hope they're
Yeah.
making plans. Sometimes I feel like they're making it up as they're going along, and that's even worse. If they don't, it's one thing that we don't know what they're doing, but I get the feeling sometimes that they don't know what they're doing. It's there. I mean, right now they're 40% below. Somebody on the show said that earlier, 40% below their target student level numbers rate. Maybe they need to slow down a little bit. Maybe they need to plan it out a little bit more, because it's not enough just to change the name. The university doesn't have a reputation yet. It's reborn. It's a new university, and so if you're going to try to convince people to come here, you got to show that you've got a good university. And one of the things people want is the arts. Even if you don't major in it, you want to take those classes. You definitely want to, have all of that available. So, because if you don't, you're not going to attract the unit, the type of students and the number of students that you want. And so, I wonder, maybe they're getting a little bit ahead of themselves here. CR did the same thing a few years ago. They just started like buying property and wanting to push their way into situations. They won a Jefferson Center and the rest. And then when they didn't get it, they were like, well, that's the only thing in Eureka that we could, has any value to us. They got to set aside the arrogance and realize they're part of a community. They're not separate. And they need to keep the arts. I think it was a big mistake to close the First Street gallery, because that was an intersection between community and university. If anything, they should be offering more out there to integrate it. But the problem is universities so often don't see it, or they just feel like they can do what they want, and the rest of the community just needs to adapt to them, and that's a big problem.
With the First Street Gallery, they had just put a bunch of money into redoing that whole building. They rebuilt the whole interior of that building specifically to be an art gallery, and then they just pulled the plug on the whole project.
The new president came in. No, we don't need that.
There was a great, well-coordinated campaign from people to save the space. Just same with KHSU. So, it's a community connecting. It's a way the university connects with the community, and the town gown split is really bad, and it seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, and we didn't want to get into this too much, but they also basically gutted the KHSU, which I wonder if they'll keep that name now. A lot of us here at Access Humboldt are kind of refugees from that, because they just decided it just wasn't a value to the students, even though it was of great value to the community. Again, it was just a unilateral decision out of nowhere, out of the blue, actually. And it's not the only thing, and it happened right about the same time as the shutting down the gallery, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was they just all of a sudden decided they were going to focus on doing their own thing, their own way. And anyway, we don't need to revisit that history. We all remember it. In terms of HSU, I had a show scheduled for the very night that they shut it down, and now it's kind of, as far as I'm concerned, a zombie station. You've got some national programming. They've expanded the national programming, but nothing really local.
When they announced that they were going to expand the programming, included some good, interesting national public radio stuff, they said flat out, KHSU used to be a community station. It is not anymore. It's going to become a national station, national public radio station. No, they said it's not a community center, or it's not a community station. That word community keeps popping up.
It's not even a student station. It's just a robot. I mean, but anyway.
They do have their student station still up and running. But
Yeah.
RFH is still kicking for sure. I think that this is a good example of where when like as Bob was saying, if you put that A in the STEM, we get all sorts of like potential employment opportunities. Broadcasting is not going away. Streaming is absolutely the wave of the future, and radio has been doing that for a very long time. And if they wanted to, they could use those resources to really augment that. I wanted to point out that in 2026 they are going to add a digital art media BA, so there are some components of art that they are keeping, but I think that they could be doing a lot more with their existing resources, which is what we're hearing right now. And as far as like their numbers being down, the only note I would add is the Sacramento Bee, using Humboldt's numbers, says that our enrollment is up 7% this fall since the name change. It's a sample of a single semester, so I don't know that it's very significant, but we're moving in the right direction. I don't know.
Yeah, we had the pandemic too, so I mean, there's a lot going on.
yeah, it's up from what point? This semester versus the pandemic semester? I believe
Right.
that.
Yeah,
I
That's
believe
what
that
the
it's up from that.
Sacramento Bee says, is like there's a lot of folks coming back to school too, so it's really hard to know if the Polytechnic is really driving that.
It's something that was curious to me. I noted in their planning for the future, they talk about 30% of classes will be online. What does that mean? Does that mean that the in-person classroom is a thing of the past, is going to be replaced by Zoom stuff like this?
Yes, in a lot of ways it seems like that. I was thinking of going back to school for whatever, and I was looking at UC Davis because they have such a great online program.
Yeah.
And,
So
it is a way to
but does
kind
it
of
mean
allow housing elsewhere.
does it mean exclusively online or a
It would have been
combination?
exclusively online for the program
Interesting.
track that I was looking at.
Interesting. I mean, I mean, we all saw this coming. Those of us who watched Star Trek and all the rest. I
Right.
mean, it is what it is. But anyway, and it does offer people opportunities that might not have otherwise be able to access the university. It's not all bad.
Well, especially rural family life where people can't leave. They have multi-generations to take care of. They have farming to take care of. They have out here family-owned cannabis industry to take care of. They can't run away from obligations or don't want to leave, or don't want to leave what they know and what their community that they love. Though what we don't answer any, we don't solve problems on the show. We just discuss everything. Though it is about time for our closing comments. Try to keep a watch on your clocks. You've each got 2 minutes to kind of say goodnight. Any final thoughts, any wrap-ups you feel like, and if I do interrupt you, it's just because I want to let others have a chance. Let's start with Eric.
All right. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the communities itself is going to be going through some major changes over the next couple of years, over the next 5 to 10 years, and I just sort of want to call out, because I don't even know if anything exists, what the liaison is between the county and the cities and the university. There ought to probably be some type of committee or something that incorporates, that has representatives from all of them, kind of like the HCOG with transportation, right? But it involves the university, so that it's all there has to be an understanding that the planning has to benefit everybody and has to take into account all the different interests, because in my view, the real danger is when a university just decides that it's going to do its own thing without regard to the community, without community input, and it doesn't see itself as part of the community. Everything is geared towards, well, the 18-year-old student like that. I believe the president actually said that at one point, and it's not just about the students. It's a university should be regarded as a community asset and resource. And it offers all kinds of things like that. I brought my kids there to learn music on Saturday mornings, right? I mean, people go there, the teams, sports teams teach kids and the rest, but there needs to be more of that, and it needs to be made systematic. And that's just my closing thoughts on it.
Okay, Aaron.
I think that one of the things I would really emphasize is a note we got from Bob at the top, which is that in order to maintain this conversation that Eric is talking about, the community really needs to remain informed, and they need to make sure that their voices are heard. There are ways that you can communicate with the university as this is going through. But I think that when we look at, the population numbers that are coming, when we look at the wage disparities that are going on system-wide, there are like protests, there are potential strikes coming up. There's all sorts of ways that the community can get involved beyond just sending an email to a developer that's not really going to consider it. And it's worth, thinking about ways that you can work within your neighborhood to try to motivate some folks to access some of that. The last thing I want to say is that I really appreciate the work that Cal Poly Humboldt is doing to speak to the community. The new child development program, I think, is going to be really great. The new nursing program, I think, could really prove dividends for us. I think that there's all sorts of new art programming going on up there that I think we can get excited about. And I definitely want to mention the Native American Studies Food Sovereignty Lab and all of the new ways that the Indigenous Studies program is working in towards this, STEM emphasis with regards to food. I think that that's something that everyone here really values, that's taking a lot of community input. And it's not all woe and gloom here. There's lots of great things going on up there.
Thank you, Aaron. Bob.
I don't know how to wrap all this up. I was telling Matt, our host, who isn't here, he has a piece of tape over his. He's actually one of the people here. But we were talking about it beforehand. The university has a responsibility, I think, to communicate better. I think that's the main thing that worries me. I was a journalist for a long time. I still kind of keep my finger in the pie. The last big story I wrote for the Bad Reunion was about the destruction of the university center. People don't even know what happened because it was impossible for me to get information because everybody was afraid to talk. And the University Center was an auxiliary organization. The whole campus was run by auxiliary organizations, which are not actually part of the university. Food services, that's where I worked my way through college, working for food services. It was not working for the university. It was parallel. And they just sort of said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And that's I know I'm bringing up a totally different topic, but it's an example of how do you find out what's going on? And, for a long time, in the last couple of years, it's like, oh, COVID, you can't do that. You have to do the, we have to deal with the COVID, so you can't come on campus, you can't be asking questions. There's nobody to answer your questions. They have their campus campus information officer who doesn't give you any information. Like, how do we get better information about what's going on? Just this split between town and gown is really dangerous, I think. When it comes to housing, how's it gonna work? We're gonna build housing for the university exclusively, or it's like if they had been thinking about the community, they would have talked to the senior citizens who were planning on building a senior housing development. Instead of just saying, "Oh, we're bigger than you," it's like It's like the university is the big brother, but it's not. It's not supposed to work that way.
There are a lot more questions, I feel like, that we've come to, and a lot of options for the direction the university can take. I want to thank you everyone for joining me tonight. Bob Doran, you can see him. You have the hum back up on air now. We've got Eric Kirk, who you can listen to directly after this program on Redwood Wonk. We've also got Dr. Aaron Donaldson. I guess you can see him around Cal Poly Humboldt University, Humboldt. You can see him running around there giving lectures and
climbing stairs.
Climbing stairs. Still the only university where you end up healthier as a freshman than you came in with. That's about all the time we have today. Thank you to our panel members. Of course, we'll be back next week with another Thursday night talk. If you have topics or suggestions for this show, please email us at kzzh@accesshumboldt.net. And just a reminder, this show replays every Friday evening at 8 p.m., 96.7 FM. You can also watch the show on Access Humboldt's YouTube channel. Just look up Access Humboldt. Do subscribe, share, do all that good stuff, and maybe one day we'll see you on TikTok, but we got to get past just the bare minimum here. Thank you, and I'm Talvi Fried. I'll see you next week.